Hey, Dr. Vella. This is Marco Gacina from Period 3. I'm here today with my screencast of my project that I worked on with Robert Davis. We discussed the evolution of politics and music, which is a broad title, but essentially what we discussed was the evolution of political and protest songs and their use, and mainly the sources behind why certain periods saw a certain density of political and protest songs. So we will begin with Green Day's American Idiot. The American Idiot in question was President George W. Bush. So in this album, Billy Joe Armstrong and the rest of the guys from Green Day essentially paint America as this desolate wasteland, and some of the songs on the album certainly have a more overtly political tone than some of the other ones, I'd say. American Idiot, the title track, is definitely an example. Rails against mainstream media, rednecks, President George Bush, who is again the namesake of the album and that specific track. Holiday, track 3, listed at the bottom right here, I'd say is definitely the most overtly political track on the album. You can see on the right column, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but on the right column, a couple lines in, Sieg Heil to the President Gas Man, bombs away is your punishment. That makes direct reference to President George W. Bush, essentially comparing him to Hitler. And then another of the more political lines, there's a flag wrapped around a score of men, a gag, a plastic bag on a monument, essentially just trashing the American flag. And American Idiot was largely created as a response to the Iraq War and the invasion of Iraq that took place in the early 2000s, which is a surprisingly, considering how relatively little it's talked about today, considering how much of a generational event it was in the early 2000s. The Iraq War spawned a surprising amount of protest music, which brings me to my next source. Um, the Dixie Chicks. This one's not actually a song. This is just a quote that frontwoman Natalie Maines stated in a during a concert in London. She said, "Just so you know, we're on the good side with y'all. We do not want this war, this violence, and we're ashamed the president of the United States is from Texas." So that was a hugely controversial. It can't be understated how controversial that statement was at the time and still today. The country music scene was very, very conservative. Much of the music being produced in the country music scene was just, for lack of a better word, just corny support the troops type of tracks. And so the Dixie Chicks coming out and saying that, uh, just talking brutally about President George W. Bush, a Republican, that did not go over well with the country music community. They were quickly pulled from the vast majority of the nation's country radio stations, and their sales plummeted, even though they kept winning. Actually, they started winning more Grammys after the "We're ashamed the president of the United States from Texas" situation, but their sales really flatlined. Um, One thing that's really interesting to me about this situation is that today it's a somewhat of a parallel to today. Um, Conservatives like to talk about cancel culture a lot, and they attribute it to the left in a broad sense. When I'd say this is certainly the prime example of cancel culture in recent history is this: the Dixie Chicks absolutely being obliterated by the Republican Party and conservatives for simply stating their beliefs. Um, I thought that was really interesting, and just another example of how much came out of the Iraq War in terms of political and protest music. And my last source that I'll discuss today is John Fogerty's cease and desist to then President Trump, the front man of great all time band Creedence Clearwater Revival. He's also had some great solo work. It's not some, a lot of great solo work over the past decades. But so uh, in anticipation of the 2020 election, where he faced re-election, President Trump played "Fortunate Son" at a rally of his as his walk-up song, which Fortunate Son lyrically is a Vietnam War protest song, and it is certainly it is certainly a thick, beautiful, hilarious layer of irony that Donald Trump of all people would be the one to play Fortunate Son as a patriotic song, considering that he is almost the spitting image of the person that the lyrics of Fortunate Son are attempting to portray. Fortunate Son deals with Vietnam draft dodgers, and essentially the senator's son in the song is Donald Trump, someone who was able to get out of obligatory military service by virtue of his father's wealth. Um, so as a result, John Fogerty issued a cease and desist and called Trump out directly. Quote right here: Mr. Trump is a prime example of both of these issues. The fact that Mr. Trump also fans the flames of hatred, racism, and fear while rewriting recent history is even more reason to be troubled by his use of my song. So, Fogerty absolutely 100% objected to Trump's use of the song and acknowledged the irony considering Trump's personal history. And I'd say this is a great representation of the revival of protest music. Another great track is "We the People" by A Tribe Called Quest, is a track that directly attacks President Trump. But yeah, this is just a great example of the revival of protest music around 2016 that coincided with the candidacy and eventual presidency of Donald Trump. Um, and we alluded to right here, "Born in the USA" is another by Bruce Springsteen, all-time classic song right there. But it's another song that is widely misinterpreted. A similar so-called patriot, Ronald Reagan, played that at rallies. Just another fine layer of irony. For his 1984 reelection, he was playing "Born in the USA" the same way Trump was playing "Fortunate Son," not understanding the lyrics of the song. And yeah, our key takeaways for this presentation: just protest music and political music can come from all sorts of sources, and there's certainly a constant stream of protest music coming out, but certain world events tend to produce a higher density of protest music. What stuck out to us was the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and the candidacy of Donald Trump and the election of Donald Trump. And overall, I'd say that protest music is a great way to get a lens into the youth perspective, I suppose, or the artistic perspective on important life-changing events. Thanks, Dr. Vela. Hope you have a great summer.